911 operators. What's the dumbest call you've ever received? I'm a telephone triage nurse, so not 911, but a 24-hour hotline for people to call when they're having a medical problem, but aren't sure if they need to go to the ER or not. I have a few favorite stories, but I'll share this one. A quite pregnant, don't remember exactly how far along, but definitely past 30 weeks, woman calls to say that her doctor told her to refrain from having sex for the rest of the pregnancy, and she didn't understand why. I looked at her file and saw she was having preterm contractions, so I explained that sexual activity can cause contraction, so it was safer to abstain so the baby could stay inside as long as possible. She tearfully exclaims, "But how will I feed the baby?" Me, "I'm sorry, ma'am, could you repeat that?" Patient, "How will I feed the baby if I can't have sex?" The patient was convinced that her baby was living off of her boyfriend's semen. I explained about the umbilical cord, etc., but she refused to believe me until I asked her about single moms, lesbian moms, etc., and asked how she thought their babies fed and grew. After a moment of silence, she thanked me and started to hang up the phone, but not before I heard her screaming her boyfriend's name. That man had a good thing going for a while there. I honestly wasn't sure if I felt more sorry for him or a baby growing up in that household. Story 2, had a drunk person call to report he was being harassed. Truth was, he was being arrested by our officers for throwing pizza at people. All I heard in the background was one of my officers saying to him, "That better not be our dispatcher on the phone," followed by some muffled talking, and my officer taking the phone and saying, "He will be taking a ride with us now," and hung up. Still laugh about it to this day. Also had a drunk woman call 911 because she couldn't remember her phone passcode. Story 3, caller. A deer just swam across the river behind my house. Me, "Okay, call there." "Well, I am worried it might be cold." Me, "See, well, there is nothing we can do about a deer being cold. Didn't it run off after swimming the river?" Caller, "Yes." Me, "Well, ma'am, it's a wild animal, and I'd guess it's going to be fine." Caller, "Okay." Story 4. Oh, time to ducking shine. Had a lady trying to call an ambulance because she opened a package from Amazon at home, and she was afraid that her kid was about to have a major allergic reaction from the packing peanuts, because the kid was allergic to peanuts, and when her kid mentioned what they were called, she freaked out. Story 5. My mom works as a 911 operator. She got a call one time from a girl in gym class at the local high school. She was in a panic and completely serious, saying there was a squirrel on top of a telephone pole at the school and it wasn't coming down. Story 6. Not an operator, but my now ex-boyfriend who called in. He usually worked a late shift, walking home about 2 a.m. This shift, he got off work a few hours late. "I'd like to call and report a fire. We live in a fire-prone area, and it was the season." 911. "Where is it located, sir?" Biff, "On the hillside just east of city." 911. "Can you be more specific?" Typing away in the background. Yeah, and gives a more detailed location. "Oh, it's getting bigger. The whole top of the hill is on fire now." 911. "Stay calm, sir. We're sending somebody out." Fuff. "It's getting bigger. Doesn't anybody else see this? It's lighting up the sky around it. It's huge." Wait. 911. "Sir?" Fuff. "I am so sorry. I'm not usually out this time of night. I just got off work late. That's the sun." 911. "I am so sorry for wasting your time. There is no fire. That's just the sun rising." "Never mind, I'm really embarrassed." 911, "That's fine, sir. I will cancel the call. Thank you for calling." Story 7. I have been in the 911 biz for over 22 years. If a caller starts the call with, "I swear I'm not crazy," then you need to buckle up for some insanity. A guy started a call with those words after escaping from his apartment and running to the closest 7-Eleven. He swore that his roommate were turning into giant crabs that was going to show the officers that they were currently in giant cocoons transforming. As you might expect, he was tripping balls. Story 8. Not an operator. I'm a prosecutor. Guy lived in a rooming house that had a public area where all the residents could hang out. It had a microwave in it, provided by the landlord. Guy called 911 around midnight one night because the microwave wasn't there. The conversation with the dispatcher went something like this. Dispatcher: "So, you called 911 because a microwave you don't even own is missing? Did you ask your landlord if he took it?" Guy: No. Dispatcher: "Well, that's not an emergency, sir." Guy: "But I'm really hungry." Meanwhile, a person with an actual emergency had to be put on hold briefly because this guy was adamant that this was the worst thing to ever happen. The genius insisted that police officers be sent to his rooming house ASAP because of the missing microwave. Officers showed up so they could cite him for improper use of 911. The guy pleaded not guilty and requested a jury trial. He represented himself. The jury was out 20 minutes before it announced its guilty verdict. Story 9. Police, 911 operator here for 15 years. The stories I have. I've had someone call 911 to know how long to smoke a brisket. I've had someone call 911 to ask what the fines for parking tickets are. I've had someone call 911 to wish me a Merry Xmas when I was working at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning. I've had someone call 911 report that their trunk wasn't opening and they wanted to know what to do about it. I've had someone call 911 in a rural community because a black dude was walking down the street, and we don't get their kind here. I worked on 9/11. I had people call 911 for weeks after because there were 3 brown guys in a car, and I thought you should know about it. I've had someone call 911 because they were lonely, about a million times, and many, many more. I've done this for a while. Do people abuse the system? Sure, but for the most part, I'm happy with how our children are taught to only use 911 if it's a life or death emergency or if there's a crime in progress. Story 10. How far down is it snowing? All the way to the ground. Now get the duck off my emergency line. The neighbor is giving my horse substances, 500 or earlier, every single day. Usually followed up about an hour later by, it's substances. Lady, but he is giving your horse substances. Substances are expensive. And my personal favorite, exact quote, my washing machine is telling me to file for bankruptcy. This was a confused elderly lady, so it was actually a little sad, but I'm including it because it left me completely speechless at the time. I think my response was, you what? Washing machine lady was fine. It was a minor medical call. Story 11, X911 operator. Worked in the Midwest. Lots of your garden variety daily dumb calls, but this is next level stupid. Story goes a little something like this. 911, what is the location of your emergency? Address. Site. So I'm not really sure if this is an emergency. This is so embarrassing. I'm sorry. I answered an ad on Craigslist for some services, with a woman, and somehow this ends in you dialing 9911 at 1 a.m. And I answered the ad that said, send me what you got. So I sent her, some pictures. I got a reply that said I had sent these photos to his daughter. I didn't know. I really didn't know. I think maybe someone put her number there as a joke, Right, okay. So you want to speak with an officer? But what's your name? Well, I don't want to say my name and get in trouble or anything. I'm just worried that this needs to be brought to someone's attention and get it out there, You're on a recorded line with all of your information on our computer, homie. But proceed. I transfer the call to the on-duty Seicht, hoping he'll open up to another dude. He does. And then the truth erupts into a twisted tale of a love zoid straight out of an M. Night Shyamalan diary. It turns out the caller wasn't an abuser at all. A particular ad from a woman in a city called Escort, crap you not, claiming to be 25 years old piqued, among other things, his interest, and he dutifully complied to the demand for junk shots. A brief time later, he was textually accosted by a reasonably enraged man claiming to be the father. Homeboy apologizes profusely and attempts to explain the situation by sending Daddy a link to the ad in question, presumably followed by the ordering of P90X and gathering of bail money. It is at this point the story takes a nosedive. Daddy, isn't. Daddy's true identity becomes hubby. His innocent little girl's phone is actually the phone of his wife. That's woman for multiple men, BTW. Story 12, me, 911, this line is recorded, what is your emergency? Caller. Hi, I don't know if this counts, but 4 days ago I noticed a usual truck in my neighbor's driveway. Me. Okay? Caller. Well, the 2 guys looked really suspicious. They were walking around the house like they didn't belong there. Me. 4 days ago? Caller. It's been bothering me because my neighbors have been on vacation and no one should be there. Me. Okay, we'll take a look. The entire house had been ransacked. All the valuables were gone. Too much time had passed for the local pawn shops to have the items because they know what is stolen and needs to be moved quickly. LPT, if something doesn't seem right, don't ever second guess calling the cops immediately. If the operator gives you attitude, make a complaint. Story 13 was a 911 operator at my previous job. Had a woman call 911 because she saw someone driving down the road with his foot out the window. She was following him the whole time and admitted he had his seatbelt on, wasn't texting or speeding, he just had his foot out the window. She wanted the police to pull him over, to which I had to explain he wasn't breaking any laws. She couldn't comprehend that driving with your foot out the window is not illegal, and proceeded to hang up on me, then call 911 again, because apparently I didn't know the law and she needed someone to stop this man. We connected her to a deputy who told her if she didn't stop calling 911 for stupid reasons, he was going to ticket her for abuse of emergency communication. Also had one a couple of years ago where a dad called to ask for an ambulance because his daughter had a candle stuck inside. He tried to explain that she said she had gotten out of the shower and slipped and fell onto the candle. Medics said they found Kai jelly with the candle, so I think we all know what was going on there. Story 14, 6:30 Christmas morning. 911 goes off. 911, What's your emergency? Breathless, panicky voice. How do I get the cranberry sauce out of the can without it coming out in chunks? Open the other end and slide it out on a plate. Oh, thank you. You are brilliant. I wasn't considered so brilliant once I had to dispatch an officer over there to educate her on proper 911 usage. Merry Christmas. Here's your citation. Source: 4 years as 911 dispatcher/supervisor in rural Alaska. Hours later, edit. Some have questioned the use of limited resources in what amounts to be a petty punitive measure. Our department policy demanded an in-person response to every 911 call in town, regardless of the nature of that call. Cold pizza or homicidal maniac, if you called 911 to report it, sooner or later, an officer would be at your door. Why? That part of the state has one of the highest per capita rates of DV and abuse in the country. I handled many coded calls, my term for a call in which a caller was unable to speak freely. Sending an officer to follow up meant that we were as sure as we could be that the situation was resolved. In this case, the officer used his officer discretion to cite the caller when she failed to understand the severity of tying up the only 911 operator in an area the size of Oregon to ask about cranberry sauce. Her attitude was the deciding factor. She let the officer know, at top volume, with a healthy assortment of verbiage that would upset most people, while flinging around a saucepan and spoon, that she was not most pleased. Having recently arrived out there from the lower 48s, she had that entitlement game all nailed down. How dare he interrupt her dinner preparation? What would the neighbors think, seeing a cop at her door at 7 a.m. on Christmas? Did he think she was used to being treated like this? No, he didn't. He was 100% sure that she had never received a citation for misuse of 911 before. And I'm 100% sure she never misused it again. Story 15. It's still stuck with me for my entire life. When I was younger, my mother was a paramedic supervisor. The dispatch desk was pretty much handled by the dispatcher and whomever was closest to the phone. Pretty laid-back environment. The 911 operator would transfer and relay the calls to the person answering the phone at the ambulance station. I would randomly answer often while I was there hanging out, just to feel important. I answered one day, and this guy said he got the wrong number. Now, the same phone was used to business lines and emergency transfers, so you had to pay attention to what light turned on when the phone rang. When I answered this man's call, he called the business line. He told me it was an accident. I misunderstood and thought said there had been an accident. I immediately handed the phone to my mom so she could adult. My mom spoke to him for what seemed like hours. Turns out, the man was calling his daughter, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. He was calling to tell her goodbye because he was going to end his life. I don't know if my mom was amazing at her job or if it was fate, but that man, as far as I know, is still alive to this day and credits that to dialing the wrong number. Not exactly a 911 call, but close. Story 16. We had an old woman call in and say there was 2 guys dressed in blue trying to break in her house and abuse her. So we send about 6 cops over to her house. It turns out it was the gas company reading her gas meter. Story 17. I'm not a 911 operator, but I am a paramedic. People abuse 911. Make no mistake about it. I'll talk about one of my dumber calls recently. Anyone who works in EMS have a sea of dumb calls they can tell you about drowning in. I got toned out for a homeless guy we had just taken in earlier that shift. When we pulled up, he was standing there with his bags packed up smoking a cigarette. He said he had chest pain this time. 12 lead and a focused exam revealed nothing except subjective information that kept changing. You get to a point where you can spot your fakers. I brought him back to the ER. Turns out he just left his hat from earlier and wanted a free ride back to the hospital to get it. So he faked a heart attack, called us, and signed out a May after he snagged his hat. He was whistling when he walked out through the lobby. Meanwhile, during this run, a call goes out for a kid having an allergic reaction. I missed that call. Would have been the unit to respond had old boy not needed a ride, get his hat. So far as calls go, there's one online somewhere about a woman who called 911 after McDonald's messed up her order. It didn't surprise me. Here are a few highlights over the last bit. Had a run about someone claiming their oxygen levels were too high. COPD patient on home oxygen, 2L nasal cannula, pulse ox, hers, read 94%. No difficulty breathing, high O2 can be an issue, free radicals and whatnot. I instructed her to remove her oxygen, and it resolved pretty quickly, but we still brought her in per request. We can't do a blood gas in the truck. Had a run where an elderly gentleman's glucose was 85, and he just knew he was dying. Normal is 80, 120 milliliter. Toe pain at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night. I do want to note as providers, we treat very unbiasedly. On the inside, we may be screaming, but we treat everyone with respect, regardless of how dumb the nature of the call may be. I do, anyway. Story 18. There was a man in the town I worked for who owned some land right by his house. He sold it to developers for a fat check, and they proceeded to build a house on it. The town has an ordinance requiring construction work to finish at 5 p.m., and the workers always complied. At around 5, they would be ending their days. This mother ducker would call every day at like 5:03 p.m. to complain about the noise ordinance and say that he wanted the cops to go over investigate them. It was the sound of them packing up their tools. He was also adamant about not being identified, even though everyone in the department knew who he was. We used to duck around with him after he would tell us that we didn't need to know his name by saying, "Okay, mister," and he would start screaming about how that wasn't him. Another time we had the state police helicopter flying over our town and a few others looking for a guy fleeing the police on foot in a wooded area. This guy, different person, calls in and demands to know what the helicopter is doing. I tell him that I can't share what they're doing and that it's police business. He grumbles and says fine, but tells me that he wants me to contact them to notify them that they don't have his permission to fly over his house. I say, "Okay, sir, can I have your name, phone number, and address?" Dude's like, "My name is Mike, and that's all you need to know." Like, I'm legitimately going to radio a state police helicopter unit, never would anyway, and tell them that they don't have permission to fly over Mike's house. Last one, I swear. A different person calls the 911 line. I pick up thinking it's an emergency. Guy proceeds to tell me how there's a turtle in the road. I ask if he can drive around it and tell me where it is. He's like, "No, it's on the side of the road. No one is gonna hit it." I'm thinking then, why the duck did you call 911, you idiot? So I ask where it is, and he gave me the location on a road in our town. I ask if he can see it. He's like, "No, he's gone now." I'm like, "What do you mean he's gone?" And he answers, "Well, this was around 2 or 3 hours ago. He's probably off in the woods now." Great, thanks. Now you've wasted my time completely. So I ask why he was calling and what he expected us to do now that it was in the woods. He proceeds to tell me that we should send over a few units and have them search the woods for it. I'm pretty confused at this point, so I ask him why he wanted us to search for this turtle and why it was so important. "Well, it didn't look right." "What do you mean it didn't look right?" It didn't look right. He literally couldn't elaborate why he called 911 over a ducking turtle. Story 19. Paramedic here. Once we had a young woman call 911 around 2 a.m. saying that her legs were turning blue. Turns out she had worn a new pair of jeans to the club that night. Story 20. My friend is a 911 operator and had some teenagers call chanting "duck the police." The police were dispatched. The parents were not aware their kids made the call. Pretty sure someone got an ass whooping that night. Story 21. Worked at a level 1 trauma center. We had a guy come in with his wife after demanding that an ambulance transport him to the hospital. He was less than 2 blocks away. All he had was a broken finger. Another time we got a call for a major trauma. Single vehicle collision with the median or something like that, reported 2 patients. First one rolls in at a reasonable time, then we stand around waiting for the second dude. Ends up showing up 20-30 minutes later. Turns out he started arguing with the medics because he wanted one last cigarette before he went to the hospital. Also, we had a guy come in with full thickness burn to 60%-ish of his body because he tried refueling his lawnmower while smoking. That one was both super dumb and super sad. Story 22. I can write a book about the dumb calls I've received. I won't count the calls that come from the mentally ill folks because that's just too easy. So, guy calling to argue that his crystal meth is legal because he made it with store-bought products with his own hard-earned money. Entitled Rich Brat, demanding an officer drive her back home because she spent her travel money partying. She felt since her father was a well-known surgeon and a higher taxpayer, she should get a break and get a ride. I told her no and hung up on her. Woman calling to ask where she can get a paternity test done for herself. I was confused and asked her to clarify. If she was needing to determine who the father of a child was, she'd have to maybe contact a clinic. No. She wanted to know, how can she find out if she was the mother of someone who claimed she gave birth to them? No mental illness, no hysterical pregnancy. She was just dumb. We had an Amber Alert go out. Guy hit the mother of his children and took the kids. Man calls to complain that the alert is interrupting his TV and that the father should be left alone because he's doing a good thing to be with his kids. Woman calling to complain that her McDonald's triple thick milkshake isn't thick. Had a woman get so angry about kids playing outside on their ATVs and bikes on their family's property in the middle of the day in the summer that she had a stroke. She's ranting and raving, and then all of a sudden, she's speaking slowly and her words are slurred and she's groaning. It was a weird thing to happen, but she didn't need to be so damn angry over something like that. Oh, another woman calling, terrified, whispering into the phone, says she's locked in a closet with her kids. I'm thinking a home invasion robbery, and as soon as I get her address, I slam the call in and get ready to start updating quickly. Why was she huddled in her closet, terrified and on the verge of tears? Milk custard. Glad you asked. This woman saw a mouse in her house and was terrified and didn't know what to do because her husband was deployed. So she wanted an officer to come out and take care of the mouse for her. An officer went out and did. Your tax dollars at work. Story 23. EMT here. I once responded to a man in his mid to late 60s, lights and siren. On arrival, instead of finding him experiencing abdominal pain like he told the dispatcher he simply had an itchy belly. I get that it itches and that sucks, but do you honestly think this is a good reason to occupy an emergency ambulance? Not only did he make us take him to the ER, but asked why we weren't driving with the lights on. Good thing stupid isn't contagious. Story 24. I'm not a 911 operator, but I heard someone dialed 911 to request a mugshot of her to be removed from the internet. She got charged for misuse of 911 and had a new mugshot. Story 25. I heard a woman making a call last year that her boyfriend was abusing her because he broke up with her and locked the door to his apartment. While she was doing this, a crowd gathered to watch the screaming woman as the classes just let out. She said, "He hit me," and began hitting her face, giving herself a fat lip and a bruised eye. Cops came and she was screaming for them to come and arrest him for abuse. But 5 people came up to the cops with cell phones. She then just started ranting and raving, and eventually they arrested her once she shoved the one guy with the phone. As they did so, some hero in the crowd yelled, "You dodged the duck and bullet, mate," to the apartment she was trying to get in. I like to believe her ex heard it. Eventually, a cop came back, knocked on the door, talked to the guy, asked a few questions, and left. Story 26. I'm not a dispatcher, but back in my EMS days, I was dispatched on a call of a child being poisoned. Upon our arrival, we find a male and his mother. The mother was insisting we take them to the hospital so he could have his stomach pumped because he had swallowed chewing gum. The child was looking at us as if to say, "I'm sorry, my mother's crazy." 1 year later, same address, same family, called for poisoning. Upon arrival, we find the same kid and mother. The mother wanted to be taken to the hospital because the kid had admitted to his mother that he had taken a hit of substances when he was visiting friends the week before. The kid had the same look on his face. Story 27. I've got a somewhat related one. I was the patient in this story. A while back, I had an unfortunate encounter with a freaky virus that my immune system took such exception to, it decided to start tagging every platelet in my body. The result was an abrupt inability to clot. At all. Everything started bleeding. My doctor sent me to the emergency room. They took a look at my symptoms and handed me a red triage tag to hold. And a minute or 3 later, I got a ride on a wheelie bed up to a room full of people in various grim situations. Very, very long story short, they needed to transport me to another hospital, but because they were worried I might start bleeding into my airways and drown on the way, despite my solemn promise not to do that, they arranged for the paramedics and the air ambulance crew to ride with me. This resulted in having to call them in. Now, usually the air ambulance crew arrive to find people in dire straits. So when they walked in and saw me sitting up with my laptop out, chatting to my kids, they just moved on past looking for the gravely ill patient that needed a resus team on hand. Round and round they went until process of elimination brought them back to me. They were clearly wondering why I needed them, but were professional and lovely the whole time anyway. I got to ride back down in the most complicated rolling stretcher I've ever seen. So many buttons and monitors and doodads. A total of 5 people plus. The driver squeezed in with me in an ambulance, watching monitors and talking to me the whole way. I'm actually super glad everyone took things so seriously and were so careful, but it did feel like a giant waste of resources to just nursemaid me between 2 hospitals. Also, EMTs rock. What an awesome bunch. Story 28, X999 operator here, UK. In the same night, I had an Asian man call about toothache, for which London ambulance gave him a bollocking. Then a couple of hours later, an English female with the same problem. They actually sent an ambulance to her. Story 29. My favorite story to tell. I worked in a hospital dispatch center for a few years. All of the 911 calls made from hospital phones were routed through us to see if it could be handled internally or externally. One morning, I had just gotten to work and was dead tired. 911 call. I answer, and this woman is calling to report a missing person, her boyfriend. I could instantly tell this woman was about as bright as a solar-powered light on Pluto. But we have to take every call seriously. She proceeds to tell me that her homeless and boyfriend just walked out of the hospital 20 minutes ago, and she's afraid he is going to finally make due on his death threats. I get a description of the man and transfer the call to police dispatch. Of course, I stay on the line because it was starting to get good. She tells the 911 operator about her boyfriend. When asked if she knew how he was going to attempt died, she proceeded to guess. I'm thinking he will probably run into traffic or rent a hotel room and drown himself in the tub because he has $28 on him. Then the operator asks if he had said anything about killing himself in the last week. She says no, it has all been going well for them, even though they are homeless, and she's pregnant with another man's kid, but he wants to be the father. Then, after a moment of silence, she blurts out the best random statement I've ever heard. "We are juggalos too. Well, I'm a jug-galette, and he's a juggalo." Had the call on speaker at this point, but the mic was muted. The entire dispatch center was getting weak. I still have the recording to this day. I wish I could express just how entertaining this call was through text, but it just isn't possible. She ended up calling the 911 line 5 times over the next several hours to check for updates. We finally had to tell her to knock it off. Her boyfriend ended up being perfectly fine. He took the bus to his mom's house to take a shower and swears he told her exactly where he was going before he left. Couple of Looney Tunes. Story 30. Oh, there are so many. Here are 2 that come to mind, even though I'm sure there were many more that were probably just a dumber dumber. I was a 911 operator before computers, so technology has changed a bit, but people haven't. Elderly caller. I need the police. There's a wild rabbit in my garden eating my garden vegetables. I did not send anyone. And during some snowy weather, residents were encouraged not to drive unless they had to. We're talking 4 to 5 inches of snow. Nothing terrible. A woman called and said she had a green Toyota and wondered if it would be okay to drive. I gave a professional answer and a gentle reminder about the use of 911, and then hung up and laughed, saying, "Only blue Toyotas and white Hondas today." Story 31. Oh, this was me doing the dumb call. I was the passenger and my boyfriend was driving. I had my phone locked and in my pocket and accidentally butt dialed 00 aus equiv of 911. The radio was on, so I didn't hear anything, but the dispatcher obviously heard muffled voices and random noises. I started to receive calls back from a different number I didn't know. I tend not to answer unknown numbers, but after 2 or 3 callbacks, I picked up. Cue awkward conversation where the dispatcher clearly thought I was in a domestic situation and couldn't talk and was trying to talk in code, but with the possibility of the phone being on speaker or whatever. Especially when I denied calling 00 in the first place. Bless that person who was trying to do the right thing in what they thought was a serious situation, but it was honestly just my butt. Story 32. I was driving behind a bus on my way to work one day, and the screen on the back of the bus that usually displays the bus number was scrolling the words "Call 911." So I called. The operator asked what my emergency was, and I said, "I don't know, a bus told me to call." Realizing how stupid that sounded, I said, "Sorry, I mean there's a message displayed on the bus I'm driving behind saying to call." I gave them my location, and moments later the bus got pulled over by police cars right out front of my job. I tried to be nosy, but I never found out what happened or heard anything about it after. Story 33. When I was 3 or so, we were at a pizza place and I had to pee. I was old enough I could head to the bathroom myself or something, and there was a payphone outside the bathroom. I dialed the only number I knew, 911, and said random things into the phone. I figured I couldn't make a call without paying, so it didn't actually do anything. Fire department showed up. Story 34. Former 911 operator dispatcher. I only worked that job for a few years, but in that time, I accumulated more stupid call stories than I could ever recount. Unfortunately, most of them weren't funny stupid. Rather, they were just plain stupid. One that does stick out, however, it was the middle of a weekday afternoon. I was still in training at the time and hadn't yet developed a good ear for people who were hard to understand. A 911 line rings, and after a nod to my trainer, I pick it up. 911, where's your emergency? On the other end, I hear a man yelling in a very urgent tone. He had a very thick, urban accent and was speaking so fast I could only understand a few words here and there. He was definitely worked up about something though, and newbie me was primed for a major call. Sitting up straight in my chair, heart race increasing, rebidding the location of his cell phone in hopes of better accuracy. Fingers twitching against the keyboard, wanting to dispatch help, wanting to type notes into a call, but having no information to type. I'm talking to him this whole time, working desperately to get information about where he is and what's going on. I'm trying to get him to slow down, to talk slower and in shorter sentences. He's saying one phrase over and over, "I need," then I can't make out the rest. My trainer is straining as well, shaking his head and frowning at me as he pushes his earpiece against his head. He knows it's serious too, but neither of us can understand this panicked man. I'm working on getting some officers started to his general area, feeling stupid because I don't know what to tell them to look for. When finally, somehow, something the man says triggers the right set of neurons in my brain. "Sir, did you just say McGruff?" "Yeah, man, McGruff. That's what I've been saying." "You're talking about McGruff, the crime dog?" "Yeah, that's what I've been saying." He's gone from screaming urgently to screaming because he's frustrated. I'm no longer worried for his well-being. "Sir, just to be clear, do you have an emergency right now?" "Hell, man, I'm just trying to find out how to get a hold of McGruff." Every word he says is suddenly crystal clear, although he's angrier than ever. It turns out his whole call, to a 911 line, was about trying to see if McGruff the crime dog could come make a public appearance at his church youth group at the last minute. By this point, the call has gone on for several minutes and attracted the attention of most other people in the room. I explained to him in the nicest way possible that I had no way of contacting McGruff from the 911 center, that he would have to call the administrative lines at the police department for that, and that this was not an appropriate use of 911, which is for emergencies only. He hung up on me. I traded glances with my trainer with eyebrows raised to the ceiling. Then the phone rang again. 911, where is your emergency? Such is the life. Story 35. Friend of the family just retired it as a 911 operator, and she once had a call from an older lady who was in a panic. She had slipped her husband a Viagra without telling him, and he had the longest erection either of them could remember. The wife was nearly in tears, worried she might cause her husband a heart attack. The husband was laughing his ass off in the background, trying to calm his wife, saying things like, "I bet you didn't think the old buck still had it." And she would keep yelling at him to stop strutting around. He was going to have a heart attack. They immediately dispatched an ambulance, but after talking with the wife, realized she had no reason at all to assume her husband was having a heart attack, and in fact, she was panicking for nothing. After checking him out, the first responders left, and the poor old lady was chastised for slipping the pill and apparently was mortified that everyone knew about her sex life. The husband was happy, cracking jokes and laughing the entire time. Story 36. Also not a 911 operator, but I was an ER register and admin clerk. Never forget this one woman that came in because she got a paper hit on Wednesday. It was Friday, and it still felt painful. No other medical issues whatsoever except that paper cut. While my next patient was a woman whose face was the color of a plum and swollen like a damn ducking balloon. Boyfriend hit her around for not getting his beer on time. Those two will always stand out to me. Story 37. I recently took a 911 dispatching certification, and one of my classmates say apparently there's a woman who calls 911 when her kids forget to take the trash out. They send a cop over every time. I say just arrest her one time and be done with it. Also, I'm a security guard, and a resident called 911 because they were locked out, and I suggested calling a locksmith. Apparently, I'm in cohorts with the locksmith, and I get some kind of commission from it and trying to extort the elderly. That was fun. Story 38. I called 911 when something indeterminate was wrong, but I kept saying, "I'm sure it's nothing." The EMTs were polite, respectful, and got me to the hospital just minutes before I died. Revived and have since recovered. I cannot give 911 and EMTs enough respect for what they do. Their quick response and skillful treatment literally saved my life. Story 39. Hubby is a paramedic, and good grief. Some of the calls that come over his pager are ridiculous. For example, mom calls because her teenage son hurt, possibly broke a finger. They transport him. Mom follows squad in her car. It was a non-emergency. She could have driven him. We get a ton of calls like that. I mean, kid could have drove himself if we're being honest. I think most of the non-emergency calls come in because you are seen immediately if you arrive in an ambulance. No wait time. Story 40. Had a guy call 911 on speaker because our manager wouldn't give him a refund using a recept fished out of the garbage for an expensive supplement. 911 operator. This is not an emergency, sir. Guy. But I needed gas money. It's an emergency to me. Story 41. All right, my time to shine. Not at my center, but during training, they showed us a real recording. This guy's father went into cardiac arrest and collapsed. The caller came up with the bright idea to say his dad was shot. He figured that EMS would respond faster to a lost. The fire EMS station was literally a quarter-mile down the street, but they had to stage because they thought a weapon was involved. It took at least 10 minutes to secure the scene, and by that time the guy was already passed. During any CPR call, everything rolls and they all go lights and sirens. We even send fire engines. All fire vehicles here have paramedics and aides on them. The guy was charged with murder. If he wouldn't have lied about the gunshot, his dad would probably still be alive. Despite all that, I feel kind of bad for the guy. He was just doing what he thought would get help the fastest. At my 911 center, we get a guy who calls asking for a ride to the store to buy beer and cigarettes. When we tell him we can't do that, he says, "Oh, do you want me to drive drunk then?" He's the only caller I've ever gotten mad at. Not while I was on the phone. He does it fairly often. Also interesting are the callers who underestimate their situation. "Oh, it's no emergency, but my husband's unconscious and bleeding pretty bad. Also, we won't send out an ambulance for your dog." You'd be amazed how many people call 911 because their pets are injured. I love animals, but there are 24-hour vets. Go to one of those instead. That being said, I don't want to scare off anyone from calling. If you're in doubt, just call us. You won't get in trouble unless you blatantly abuse the system, such as prank calls or false reports. Broken down car blocking traffic? You can absolutely call us. We can start a tow truck or get a traffic unit to come out. Story 42. 10 time-wasting calls made to the Met Police. A woman called to say she had bought a cold kebab and the shop would not replace it. Callers who missed their alarm and were going to be late for a flight wanted officers to take them to the airport. A woman who had seen a clown in London selling balloons for $5 each, which was much more than other clowns were charging. Callers in distress because their low fuel indicator light had come on. A man called to say his 50p coin was stuck in a washing machine at his local laundrette and wanted police to retrieve it. A man who did not have change for a parking machine claimed staff at a car park had kidnapped him because they were refusing to let him out for free. A caller dialed 999 at on a Saturday morning and asked, "Where's the best place to get a bacon sandwich right now?" A man called 999 as he was advised to call 111 but did not know the number. A woman wanted police to deal with a couple of noisy foxes outside her home as they were preventing her from sleeping. A woman dialed 999 to say there were men in her house trying to take her away. The men in question were police officers who had come to arrest her. Story 43, 911 police dispatcher currently at work. The amount of stupid calls is astronomical. The one that comes to mind most often is that we have an extremely elderly woman in town who has a caretaker and really should be in a home, but the only numbers she remembers are 911 and the non-emergency line for the police department. One day she calls to say her caretaker isn't at her house, and she's worried. We called the caretaker. She told us she wasn't due to work until 10, and it was 9. We tell the elderly lady this, and she says, okay. She then immediately calls back saying her caretaker is missing. I reiterate that her caretaker isn't due until 10, and it's currently 9. She says, yes, but look at the time. I had to explain to this poor woman how time works because she wouldn't stop calling. At one point, I spoke with her 12 times in 30 minutes because she wasn't grasping the concept of having to leave a message for a callback with Adult Protective Services. Kind of sad, actually. Story 44. Former 911 dispatcher for large metropolitan area. Tons of dumb calls come in on 911. I don't think I have just one dumb thing. Lost? Call 911 and ask them to ping you and tell you how to get to XYZ. Had a teenager call because she and her friends were lost in a corn maze and it was getting dark out. No, it wasn't cold. Told her to holler for workers to come find them. Psych patient regularly called because she believed the government is reading my brain through the TV signals. Responding officer kept a thing of tinfoil and would make her a new hat each time he responded. Mad at your granddaddy, baby mama? Call 911 and tell us they got substances. Why is my power out? Please contact your local power company. Ma'am, sir, I think my car has been stolen. One of the first questions we ask is, are you behind on payments? Probably solid 8-10 of stolen cars are repoed. There are so many more. The job was entertaining, stressful as hell, sad, infuriating, and rewarding all at the same time. Story 45. Wait, I've got a couple more, though they're not via 911. Okay, first one's not mine, but it was related to me by another Leo dispatcher. Call comes in, female, bleed. Long story short, our award-winning all-you-can-eat college cafeteria had successfully treated an anorexic student from a fundamentalist family who had no idea what a period was, much less why she was suddenly having one. Very awkward conversation with 2 male EMTs ensues. At the same Leo dispatch job, which also did some first responder dispatch, I received a call from a student who had been playing with her roommate's EpiPen, genius move that, and it had gone off and impaled her thumb, and she was unable to remove it. On dispatching out to EMS, I received a cell call from the squad chief demanding to know why that even went out as a medical. And I quote, just tell her to pull it out, to which I could only reply, I did, she said it's stuck fast. Cue anguished sigh in a deadpan. All right, I'll get the pliers, it'll take like 4 minutes and a Band-Aid. 15 minutes later, I answer another cell call from the chief, this time with screaming in the background, and in the same deadpan tone he says, yeah, so I think we're going to need that transport now. Story 46. I once took a call from a guy who had found an unusual rock on the side of the road. Apparently he had turned it over to what were city employees or road workers of some kind. The fellow was obviously quite intoxicated, but now he wanted it back. And it was an emergency, as the rock was obviously a relic of some kind that was worth thousands, as it had an impression of some kind of bone or shell in the side of it. At any rate, I managed to convince him that if he didn't know who he had turned it over to, then we could not track down the rock, and that searching for this person was definitely not a police matter as it was given voluntarily to them, as he had said earlier on the recorded line. Hardly a marvel of a story, but it was certainly one of the dumbest reasons I had ever heard to call 911 in my time as an operator. Story 47. 911 operator. In a smallish Midwest city here, we get the usual bat removal, which we don't do, raccoon removal, which we don't do, and animal removal, which we will send our street department guys on. But the best has to be the ones who call about cats and trees. My response is always the same to those, have you ever seen a cat skeleton in a tree? The answer is always no. It's usually followed by a sigh and an apology. People will call for all of the dumbest reasons, though. Some greatest hits. Basketball is too loud in the neighbor's driveway. I lost my book in the bathroom. Aliens have abducted my mailbox. I saw a deer in my yard. The neighbor has too many children. My air conditioner is too loud. There are drunk people at a bar. I don't like what my wife made for dinner. I'm afraid a parked car may roll up a hill and strike people on bikes. I also enjoy when people try to request No lights and sirens for medical calls. You want a squad? You get the whole production. Also, don't ever tell me I don't want a black cop or no white cops. Mainly because if you tell me not to, I'm definitely sending whatever you don't want. Plus, a supervisor. If you really need a police officer, you'll take what you get. Story 48. Cop here. One time, some guy called 911 because he had multiple women in his bed that he didn't know and who refused to leave. Another time, a woman reported either a fox or a werewolf standing on a street corner. Story 49. When I was doing duty at our emergency phone, a very sweet old lady called. She was on her deathbed and needed to tell someone that she had moved her neighbor's fence several times while she lived there to steal his land. It really bothered her. I took down the details of her neighbor from some 50 years past and promised to give the information to his heirs so they could get the land back, presumably from some poor sod who now lives next door and wouldn't know what happened. The old lady then started telling me about her extremely interesting life. If I hadn't had another call then, I'd have loved to listen to her longer. Best 3 a.m. call I ever had. Story 50. Past hour. Just got off work and the last call of the night was a group of college girls running back and forth around their apartment from a possum squealing. The girls, not the possum. I've heard people get stabbed to death and make less of a fuss. Weak. Fellow dispatcher takes a call for a cardiac arrest. Person on the phone is yelling, "Come on, kid," and doing CPR, not communicating with the dispatcher. EMS gets on scene, confirms cardiac arrest and CPR in progress on a dog. Year. Lady calls about an injured animal off to the side of the road in a neighborhood with some of the highest crime in the area. Cops are busy with people getting shot and stuff. She is yelling at me that I'm cold-hearted because I haven't dispatched police, lights and sirens, and that this creature is suffering, and I'm responsible for it, etc. I ask what type of animal it is. I don't believe any animal species is more important than any other. Ma'am, what is it? It's a possum. Story 51. I'm not a 911 operator, but I feel sorry for the one who got a call from my former roommate. There were 4 of us living there. One N didn't really get along with the rest of us. One day she was doing stuff in the kitchen while we were watching TV. Roommate M goes into the kitchen for a hot dog and finds that N threw away MS hot dogs. M complains to us loudly that we were right there, and N could have asked instead of just throwing it away. Well, N overhears, and the two get in a yelling match over the hot dogs that basically ends with M calling an idiot. 15 minutes later, M leaves for the library and is stopped in the lobby by police officers and N. Police officers ask him if she threatened N, and she said no. I just called her an idiot because she was acting like one. And the officers confirm with N that nothing illegal happened. Entitlement is basically the only reason I can think of that justified calling the police over a verbal altercation about hot dogs. Story 52. Firefighter Anna EMT. I also worked as dispatcher before I got on the job. People call 911 for everything. I've gone to toothaches, earaches, headaches, fake chest pains. So the person gets a free meal, you name it. I've gone. I want to know the score of the Patriots game? Call 911. People lie about what they ail from, then we get there to find the laceration of the hand is basically a paper cut on a finger. Guess what? You may go in the ambulance because you think you'll be seen quicker. But guess what? You'll sit for hours as you'll be triaged accordingly. People abuse the duck out of 911 and call the fire department for every ducking thing. I live for my days off. Story 53. This is close enough. Not me, but a family member who was a dispatcher for 20 plus years. Someone called in because a kid had somehow gotten locked inside a newspaper box. You know, the kind with a window on the front that lets you see the front page. One of the responders spent a bit of time wondering aloud how they were going to break the window on the box without harming the kid. After a minute or two of this, a different responder put forth the suggestion that perhaps they should try inserting a couple of quarters first. It worked. Box opened, kid got out and was fine, and no paper boxes were harmed. Story 54. Not an operator, but remember reading a story a while back about 2 guys smuggling a large number of substances in between states. Apparently at one point they realized the cops were following them. The cops weren't following them, and called them pleading for them to arrest them and get it over with already. At which point they were promptly arrested, quote from 911 call, where the 2 guys who got caught trying to bring some stuff through your border and all your cops are just driving around us like a bunch of jackwagons. And I'd just really like for you guys to end it. Story 55. I could go on for pages. Probably some of the dumbest calls is people calling us for lost pets that think because they have a chip in their dog, we can track it with GPS. No. Lady called us one night and started with, "This is gonna sound crazy, but hang on peeps, because this is their crazy warning that they don't even know they give us. 3 guys broke into my apartment and came in the living room with guns and then hit my cat and left." She is giving us descriptions of what they are wearing, what they are driving, what their guns look like great eyewitness stuff, and she didn't sound crazy and we had no history with her. Half that side of the valleys, cars are heading that way, lights and sirens going to look for these guys, and the first officer there goes and makes contact with her to make sure she is okay. He keys up on his mic. A few seconds later, slow everyone down, this lady doesn't even own a cat. Lady was so bat crap crazy, she hallucinated the whole event. I got stories like this for days. Worked 8 years in a 911. Story 56. I was a 911 dispatcher/call taker for 3 years. I answered a lot of funny calls and a lot of stressful ones that have affected me. But one afternoon, this lady called and wanted to know why time was going so slow. Another one, these women called, and her issue ended up being out of jurisdiction, so I had to transfer the call. While waiting for the next agency to pick up, this lady starts yelling at someone in the house, telling them her dog farted. The next agency picks up and the lady was still yelling it. 911, what's your emergency? My dog farted. We had this one guy who was a regular. He called all the time for the dumbest crap. One day he got really drunk and decided the police were on his bad side for the day. 911, what's your emergency? Hey, this is caller. I don't mean no disrespect, but duck you, and hangs up. Sorry, format on mobile. Story 57. The most fun call I got for an emergency in the middle of the night was someone fell in the bathroom, hit the head on the toilet, and now everything is red. And with that, the caller hung up. Going through the options, everything red, bleeding head injury at best, more severe trauma possible. Better request an ambulance to meet me there to save on time. It would take me 10 minutes to get there, so I called back to make sure the patient got first aid. Asked whether the patient was conscious, breathing, had a pulse. I don't know. And the caller hung up on me again. Lovely. When I got there, the patient was fully conscious, with a slight bruise on the cheek and quite embarrassed that someone made such a fuss over it. The caller? No, not a flustered 5IO who didn't know how to call emergency services yet. It was a registered nurse. Story 58. I took a call from a very upset female. She said she was bathing her baby and he had a lump on one of his testicles. I asked if she had brought this up to a doctor. She said no, she wanted Fire EMS to come check it out. So, as per our protocol, we sent EMS Fire Code 3, lights and sirens, to this woman's house. And the baby was fine. It was a vein. Wasted resources. During this call, a call in that engine's district came in of a woman having a heart attack. Of course, that means we had to send a rig out of district to go there, which was about a 3-minute delay. Not sure if the lady died, but this is what happens when you call 911 and want an ambulance for something stupid that you should just go to your primary care physician for. Story 59. Not an operator, but I have been sent out to my share of dumb calls as a volunteer firefighter. My favorite is the woman who actually called the fire department to rescue her cat from out of a tree in her backyard. At 3 a.m. twice? I always kind of thought that kind of thing was a myth, but nope. We set up a ladder both times and climbed up to get the cat. First time, the little ducker jumped off of me and ran into the woods. The multiple times I've been called out to rescue parachutists stuck in trees, they were a lot more appreciative. Bonus fun story. Once got toned out for a water fountain on fire. Couldn't believe something that ridiculous would actually happen. Arrived on scene to a burning water fountain. I will say this about emergency services. You definitely get to see your share of wacky crap. Story 60. I can answer. I don't know if it's the dumbest call, but one time we had a hostage situation. There was a helicopter in the area circling for several hours. We get nosy neighbor calls wanting to know what's going on. Can't give out any info, just tell them to stay inside. So I answer another call, asking about the helicopter. Roll my eyes and give the same speech. The girl asked, "But is the helicopter okay? Why does it keep going in circles like that?" She thought they were going to crash land. Story 61. Actual former 911 operator. The most consistently dumb call were the missed dials saying they were trying to call 411 because, 4 and 9 are so close to each other on the number pad. Or the non-trivial number of calls that would start 911, what is your emergency? Hi, how are you? Like I'm all for being polite, but I think we as a society have agreed that you can skip the formalities when someone is dying. Or the people who would call 911 to report their power was out. Or the guy who called the non-emergency line, thankfully, to remind me that a river existed. It was during a heavy rain. He wanted to remind me of the flood control channel that ran through town. Or the guy who called a few days after 9/11 because there was a star pretty close to the moon. I guess he thought it might be a bat signal for terrorists. Story 62. Currently at work at 911 Dispatch Center. Had a 911 call tonight where caller advised he was drunk and trying to get 4011. I hang up, less than 2 minutes later, same number calls, and it's open line about two males screaming about wanting to hit each other. Never did get an address, but was able to get officers to general area, and they were found and separated. No PC for crime best call of the day. 911 call female is crying and not able to talk. I was on phone with her for 12 minutes, was able to figure out her location, that it was medical problem, and her name. But it was super scary at the end when she stopped crying. I kept thinking she is dead and would beg her to just say something. But we made it. She is alive and at the hospital for stroke at 39. Story 63. My mom was a 911 dispatcher. The funniest call I remember her telling me about was a man called to complain that his neighbor was standing on the other side of his fence with a bullhorn yelling, "It's annoyed your neighbor day." Turns out the neighbors had a bit of a feud going on. Go figure. On a related note, did you know that 911 dispatchers are not classified as first responders, despite often being the actual first responders? Therefore, they are not eligible for many first responder benefits, including treatment for the stress that they encounter on the phone. Imagine having to tell parents how to perform CPR on their infant, or hearing someone pass away while on the phone with you. Story 64. Old man from Palos Verdes near the ocean called because the ocean was too loud and asked if you could lower the volume. Put him on hold for a few minutes and got back on the phone and said, "I turned the sound of the ocean down, sir. It should be much better now." His response was, much better." Story 65. I was on a ride along with my brother-in-law who's a cop. He works nights in a small town, so he gets bored, and I ride around with him for a few hours every once in a while. One night, he gets a call. This grandma is watching her grandkids while mom is off at work. 2 boys. She called 911 because the boys ate all the bologna in the house. I don't think that's what she told the operator, but that's what it boiled down to. So as he's telling her that that's not something you call 911 for, she goes berserk and kicks him in the nuts. All over a package of bologna. Grandma went to jail for assaulting a police officer, and mom had to miss a shift at work. Story 66. I took a call from a hospital who was wanting to arrange a transfer for a patient as they were getting overloaded. The call went like this. Me. "Okay, what's the patient's problem?" Nurse. "Why do you need that? Can't you just pick them up?" Me. "We need to know what happened so that we can prioritize calls. We only have so many vehicles, so what's the problem, Mrs. Nurse? She has... Oh no, it's too embarrassing. You really should just come and pick them up." Me. "We are both medical professionals. I'm sure it isn't anything you haven't seen before." Nurse. Okay, she has a... Oh, hang on. Here comes one of your paramedics. I'll tell her." Me. "Oh, make it quick." Whispering. Paramedic. "Hi, OC. Kilo 401 here." She has an aerosol lid stuck up her fanny. Story 67. I handled a reported stalking. A divorced woman called in. Her former mother-in-law saved one of her Facebook pictures and made it her phone background. The photograph was of the divorced woman's son, the mother-in-law grandson. The divorced woman wanted her former mill arrested for stalking her Facebook. So I told the woman, 1. Anything you put on Facebook can be saved by anyone else. 2. She should delete her mill from Facebook or make her Facebook private. She, of course, flipped crap, angry that I wouldn't arrest this old woman for stalking her. She also said she wasn't going to make her Facebook private because then new people wouldn't be able to find her. Oh, and this crap happens all the time. This is just my most recent, extremely ridiculous case. Story 68. Obligatory, not a 911 dispatcher. I'm a nurse and I used to work in a neuro ICU. Most of our patients had pretty serious brain injuries and were extremely confused. Oftentimes we would have to restrain them to prevent them ripping out a drain in their brain or punching staff members. I still chuckle to myself every time I remember the little old lady who was convinced we were holding her hostage. She managed to get a hold of her phone and call 911. She then proceeded to shout that she was being held against her will in a torture chamber. Thank God for caller ID. It was easy to explain to the dispatcher that this woman was a patient in the hospital. Story 69. Not a 911 operator. And this is kind of the reverse, but one time when I was 7, my mom wouldn't give me dessert, so I threatened to call 911, and she was like, "Go ahead," thinking that I wouldn't. So I proved her wrong, and instead I told them that my parents weren't feeding me and made me sound like a victim. I think about 3-4 cops, an ambulance, and firefighters came within 10 minutes. Needless to say, everyone was so pissed off at me, and I got a beating after they all left El Mayo. Story 70. I had a 911 call the other day from someone complaining that their neighbor was throwing cats into their backyard. "Go on," I said. See, the neighbor hated the caller's dog because it always barked and often got loose. And neighbor felt that the justice system wasn't moving as swiftly and as mercilessly as they'd like. So they decided to speed up the process by throwing cats. The reasoning goes, 1. Throw random cats into caller's yard. 2. Mean dog kills said random cats. 3. Horrified, neighbor calls police on dog. 4. Dog is declared a vicious dog under the law. Problem solved. I wish that I could chalk it up to my caller being an unreliable witness, but the responding officer confirmed the theory to me after the fact. Story 71. Not an operator, but a former 911 EMT. The most ridiculous call I ever responded to was a parent that cut his kid's fingernails too short. No blood or wounds or anything like that, but the kid was crying. He called and got an ambulance and fire engine responding with lights and sirens. I've had a lot of people scamming the system, constantly, really, but this was the most ridiculous. Story 72. Listening to another dispatcher, and a guy calls in complaining of a large vehicle that kept going over the lines with flashing yellow lights on a major highway near Baltimore. It was a wide load truck, and it was about two-thirds through the call when he realized his mistake. Also, calls for pizza, bars being too loud, and asking when large holidays were. Story 73. When I was about 8 years old, I called 911 to see if it would work on a payphone. Dial 911. Hello, this 911, what's your emergency, me? Oh, it works, bye. Story 74. So, not a 911 operator, but a good friend of mine is a paramedic. 911 operators dispatched him and his partner to a scene where the description was a victim was trapped in a sewage pipe. When he got there, this drunken student had his hand stuck in a water drainage cover, the ones that look like a grill. The victim's friend was in an absolute panic, screaming at the two paramedics to rescue him. My friend went over and turned the guy's hand 90 degrees and his hand came out. A cop arrived right after this and ticketed both of them for improper use of the 911 service. Story 75. My grandmother, Rip, called 911 on her cell phone while she was a patient in the hospital. She was inpatient. The nurse helped her to the toilet and left to give her some privacy, but never responded to the call button when she was finished. My grandmother sat on the toilet for near an hour and was in pain from being on the throne for so long and couldn't stand up on her own again. She was in rehab for having broken her femur. The 911 operator was pretty confused. Wait, you're in the hospital? You're a patient, physically in the hospital right now? The next day, the administrator himself was in her room making an apology. Story 76. When my wife had her water break, she woke me up to take me to the hospital. I freaked the duck out. On the way to hospital, I was shaking. Basically, a combination of being woken up, surprise, excitement, and not knowing what to do. About a quarter mile to the hospital, I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, my wife's water broke. Are you at your house? No, ma'am. We're very close to the hospital now. What is the problem? I'm freaking the hell out. I don't know what to do. She chuckled. She told me everything will be fine. I felt stupid as Duck Story 77. I had the reverse. 911 called me in the middle of class. I got a call and looked down, saw it was 911. Might have been restricted. We're talking 10 years ago. This is how it went. Hello, this is 911 dispatch. We just received a call, then hang up. Okay, I didn't call you guys. Is everything all right? Yes, I swear I didn't call you. Are you sure? Yes, I'm pretty sure, looking at my call log now. Oh, sorry, it was off a digit. Okay, bye. Was scared crapless that I pocket dialed 911 accidentally. Story 78. Not my story, but my dad's. One of my favorite things about living at home was listening to the ridiculous reasons why people called 911. My favorite was probably the time a woman called screaming that an officer needed to go to a certain meat market. Thinking the worst, my dad got into serious mode. Then she explained that the market gave her the wrong cut of meat, and that's illegal, and you need to arrest everyone who works in that damn store. My dad's face while telling that story always cracked me up. Story 79. Was a MP stationed in Germany, and this lady called complaining that the kids in the apartment above her were stomping around just to make her mad. It was Christmas morning. That isn't the worst, but it was just so petty and crafty. Story 80. I'm not a 911 operator. However, I am a first responder. It's around 3 a.m. on Tuesday night. I'm just about to go to bed and my pager goes off. So I rushed to the station to get my turnout gear on. We rushed to the scene. It came over as a car fire. We got there and saw no flame. Turns out she left her card in the ATM too long and it sucked it in. She got 4 different stations dispatched. Story 81. Working in a university police department. So many dumb calls. First thing that drives us crazy is every fall semester we get the overly concerned parents who haven't heard from their kid in 6 hours. Sometimes less than that. They'll call in freaking out and demanding we hunt down their kid. We still treat it like a real call for service though. Welfare check. So much dumb crap we get called for. Story 82. I used to work at a video store in high school, and one of the regulars was a cop who always shared stories with us. He was awesome. Anyway, he told me one time, responded to a call that day from a lady calling 911 on a guy because she waved at him, and he didn't wave back. She actually was on 911 following the guy, telling the operator where to direct the police. My cop friend ended up citing her for abusing 911. Story 83. I was a 911 operator for a year. Been in EMS 10 years. Lady called because her cat lost her roommate's bird and there was feathers everywhere. She wanted someone to come out and clean it up. She wouldn't stop calling and eventually got arrested for 911 abuse. Story 84. Caller. My boyfriend took my dog. Me. And why'd he does that? Caller. Because he's an a-hole. Me. No, I mean what possessed him to take the animal? Caller. Cause he's a ducker. Me. Why does he have the dog? Caller. Cause he's a piece of crap. Me. All right, I'll send an officer out to talk to you. Story 85. Not a 911 operator, but my favorite story has to be one for my brother, a paramedic. He had a guy who called 911 for facial burn. When they showed up, he immediately told them he refused transport because he wasn't going to pay for that, but asked them to give him some of that cooling cream to help with the burn, the green stuff. Yeah, the guy had a sunburn, wanted aloe, so he called 911. 911 operators. What are some of the stupidest reasons someone has dialed 911? Story 1. I was a 911 dispatcher for a short time. You get a lot of really stupid calls. Usually people who don't get the concept that 911 is for emergencies, but it's not a big deal to me unless they use an unusual amount of resources. Calling a lot, faking information to get higher priority, using ambulance as a taxi, etc. One guy called frantically saying that he saw the body of a woman, early 20s, wearing nothing but shorts. He gave a detailed description, hair color, skin color, body position, the whole bit, and said she was by the side of the interstate, in the middle of an affluent suburban area at rush hour. So we figured this had to be a really fresh crime scene. We started scrambling together officers to get there ASAP, a big hassle considering it's rush hour, and they're all dealing with accidents and stuff like that. On top of that, we can't say what the issue is on the radio is because we have too many busybodies who monitor police radio, then call us to try to get juicy details or otherwise meddle. So we have to get these officers to their cars to read the computer, leaving other issues, etc. And these are suburban cops in the Midwest. A murder is a damn big deal. The guy calls back a few minutes later. I checked again. It's a dead deer. Peeved, I announce on the radio that the trip is canceled. It was a deer. An officer sarcastically calls back, with shorts on? Story 2. When I was a kid, I called 911 and yelled, "Nah!" into the phone. The Lion King had just come out, and I thought it was hilarious. After the third or fourth time, they sent a police officer to the house, and he gave me a stern talking to. My mom was pretty embarrassed. Story 3. Not a dispatcher, but I worked security at a college and fielded the calls as I did my rounds. The best story I have is a guy who called about a bobcat in front of the library. He called up out of breath and said there was a wildcat intimidating people, so they could not enter or exit the building. I was fairly close, so I started to run over. I asked if anyone was injured, and he said no. I was expecting a group of people held up at the entrance by a huge cat hissing at everyone. I told him to keep away from it and stay on the line. When I got there, I found a tabby cat perched on a bench. I verified the caller and the cat he called about. I went over to the cat with him and started pet him. He rolled over and let me scratch his belly. The guy was shocked and said, "Oh, someone has domesticated it." Yep, I smiled and walked away. Story 4, former 911 operator here. Had a guy call asking if it was legal to hit his neighbor because his hedges were hanging over his property and he considered it trespassing. Had a woman call during a power outage asking what she should do with her steaks. Had a guy smoke way too much substances and call in freaking out, ask for an ambulance. Story 5, I'm not a 911 operator, but I have ducked a lot of girls. This one time a girl came just seconds after I do HJ, and I was mighty pleased with myself. Turns out she didn't end but had a minor heart attack, and she felt so bad afterwards that I called 911, the local emergency line, and had to explain the situation for them to come pick her up. Note that this was iGirl, so the operator was curious to what we had been doing to induce a heart attack. This is now 6 years ago. I do not have any contact with this girl, but I know she is alive and healthy. Someone wanted proof. I'm sorry. This was 6 years ago, and this happened in a small town on the west coast of Norway. I really did not want to call the local newspaper bragging about this, so I don't believe there exists any written evidence of this. Story 6. One woman called sobbing because the snowplow filled in the end of her driveway that she just shoveled. One woman called saying that every time she went outside, the frog said, pussy. A man called to say his house was infested with hundreds of ant-sized dogs. Fireworks. One woman called because she thought her house was being shot at. Turns out she forgot about her eggs boiling on the stove, and they exploded. I wanted to give her a hug, though. She was just a little old lady. Story 7. Just yesterday, my wife called 911 because the dog across the street was out on the roof and the owners were gone. I explained that's not what the emergency number was for, got a ladder out of the garage, and stuffed that fat-ass beagle back in an open window. Story 8. 911 dispatcher supervisor for 5+ years here. We get a ton of missed dials because some genius at Verizon decided it would be a good idea to have phone numbers that start with "had a woman call because her baby wasn't breathing." So we gave her instructions to do CPR. Medics got there and found her doing CPR on her dog. Had another woman call saying her cat was stuck in a tree. I just knew she wanted the fire department to come save the cat. So I got my "that's only in movies, TV" speech ready. Then she said, "So my husband climbed up to get the cat, and now he's stuck too." Story 9. This happened to my uncle, not me. They had a guy one time call in screaming that the devil wasn't leaving his soup. He then exclaimed, "I'm gonna to hit a mother ducka if you Koreans don't get it out." So it turns out that the guy was high on meth and is serving his second prison sentence. Also, there was in fact 0 devils in his soup. Story 10. My brother called 911 multiple times just to see if it worked. He once did it at my grandma's condo in Florida, and we didn't realize he had done it because he hung up immediately. As we were leaving to go to the beach, the police show up and try to find the caller, and my brother never owned up for a while. Also, my neighbor called the cops because there was a van parked on the street near her house for a couple hours. Turns out the driver was working on someone's house. She called the cops again because some guy pulled up to her son while he was walking home from school and asked where house number 16 was. The kid ran all the way home because he thought the guy was going to kidnap him, and the kid claimed he saw a gun. The gun was a rake, and the dude was a landscaper. Story 11. I was a 911 dispatcher for just under a year. Realized that it is not for me. A lot, if respect for those peeps. This was in Gilbert, Arizona. If you know about this place, this story shouldn't surprise you. The call came in from an elderly woman because there was a black guy at the park. I asked her what he was doing. She said nothing, he's just sitting there. So I asked her what the problem was. Her response was, he shouldn't be there. I almost sent the cops to her place to pick her up as a mentally unstable person. Story 12. Not a 911 operator, but a former EMT. We had a call for a guy with a toothache at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. The guy stated that he'd been hurting for about 3 weeks, and no, it wasn't getting any worse. He was insisting on going to the hospital, no matter how much we discouraged him. Then he keeled over and went into cardiac arrest. Not so stupid anymore. Story 13. I was a 911 dispatcher in a small rural county for about 2 years. After some training, I was finally taking calls, and the very first 911 call that came in was from a middle-aged man who was driving with his elderly mother. He had stopped to get gas or something and accidentally locked his keys in the car, and his mother couldn't figure out how to get out of the locked car. I'm all, okay, sir, can you ask her to open the door? He's all, I'm trying to get her to unlock the door, but I don't think she understands what I'm saying. I'm at a loss for words as this wasn't the emergency I was expecting. Meanwhile, I'm looking to my supervisor for some assistance, and she is laughing so hard she can't help. They eventually figured it out between themselves, but it seemed pretty stupid at the time. Other great calls include the kid turning himself in for marijuana possession simply to spite his girlfriend, who, according to the caller, wouldn't stop being a Karen. Another call was in the middle of the night from an elderly lady who was worried about the ice on her front step as she had to go to the doctor in the morning. And the craziest call came from a woman who was convinced that the evil in her neighborhood were in her attic cooking med and causing fires that they then used to throw her dogs and cats into. This lady also called once to inform me that her house was prepared for takeoff and she wanted to get clearance. Turns out she wasn't all that sane. Story 14. Not an operator, but I have a story. When I was little, I was at a family reunion and knocked some kid's potato salad out of his hands. He called 911 on a payphone, saying I stole his potato salad. Story 15. I'm on the phone all day at work and rarely on the phone at home. We need to dial 9 to get an outside line. I'm at home one day and I dial 9. Then I look at the number I'm calling. Then I get distracted, look back at the number and press 1. It starts ringing. I didn't even finish the number yet. I look at the receiver and see 911 is pressed. In a panic, I hung up. So, as the officer that came to my front door explained, stay on the phone and explain the situation. Mistakes happen. I think this must happen a ton. The damn dial 9 for an outside line and now having to dial 1 in the area code. You've got people calling 911 all day long. There's going to be plenty of mistakes. Story 16. Someone called 911 and spoke Cantonese only. Since we couldn't translate, we took him to the closest hospital. Come to find out, he needed a ride for his appointment, and we took him to the wrong hospital. Needless to say, he was pissed. Duck him, that's not what 911 is for. Story 17. Family member is a 911 operator. She says on a regular basis, people will call 911 for help because their car battery died and they are locked in, not realizing there is a manual lock. And despite not being an emergency, you can't really just hang up on them. If they are too stupid to figure it out on their own on a hot day, you will have them passing out in their car and possibly dying. Story 18. To ask for directions. To ask if they can legally own a monkey. To say they called the regular line and that girl they talked to wasn't very helpful. Dude, it's still me. To ask why we haven't gotten there yet. To unlock their car. And can we hurry? To say they think someone messed with their AC, but they don't want to file a report or talk to anyone about it. They heard a weird noise, saw a weird car, a suspicious person, something they thought was strange 30 minutes ago, and so on and so forth. Story 19. This has happened on 3 separate occasions to me. Person dials 911 from the ER waiting room of one hospital, requesting an ambulance to go to another by ambulance so they don't have to wait. I just lost my junk and I'm gonna flush it down the toilet before you get here. He did. You took my husband to the hospital, but you left his dog here, and now it has to pee. You need to come take it out. I can't walk outside. Story 20. Not an operator, just a guy who called 911 to order a pizza once. Not my fault, my whole friend changed the number for Domino's in my contacts. I was very apologetic. Story 21. I had a call that started out pretty dumb, but was actually pretty serious. 911, where's your emergency? 102.3 Main Saint. Okay, what's going on there? I'd like to order a pizza for delivery. Oh, great, another prank call. Ma'am, you've reached 911. Yeah, I know. Can I have a large with half pepperoni, half mushroom, and peppers? I'm sorry, you know you've called 911, right? Yeah, do you know how long it will be? Okay, ma'am, is everything okay over there? Do you have an emergency? Yes, I do. And you can't talk about it because there's someone in the room with you. Moment of realization. Yes, that's correct. Do you know how long it will be? I have an officer about a mile from your location. Are there any weapons in your house? Nope. Can you stay on the phone with me? Nope. See you soon. Thanks. As we dispatch the call, I check the history at the address and see there are multiple previous DV calls. The officer arrives and finds a couple. Female was kinda gets sex up, and boyfriend was drunk. Officer arrests him after she explains that the boyfriend had been beating her for a while. I thought she was pretty clever to use that trick. Other dispatchers I worked with had similar things happen, but that was a first for me. Story 22. There were so many people calling 9911 asking about the time, school closings, and hundreds of misdials and butt dials. I also got asked out a couple times by lonely girls calling to chat. There were also really crazy people calling in with, I'm being hit by a lobster. Sylvester Stallone lives in my pores. My children are changelings and escaped. FBI is controlling me through my hats. The funniest non-crazy stories was a really rich and affluent guy who lived in a huge house called about a disheveled-looking SUV at the bottom of his huge driveway, and it wasn't the gardeners or housekeeping. The cop had to run the tags, and it turns out it belonged to his daughter, and he had bought it for her. There was another call about a burglary, and the caller called back later saying everything is fine and that it was the cat. So many working dispatch and call taking. Story 23. Once at the hotel that I used to work for, a guest called 911 intending to reach me at the front desk. The 911 operator called me back saying likely the woman was a git, but asked me to go check out the room anyway. I did, and the woman kept saying the print on the phone said to dial 911, which is correct, but it also says to do so in an emergency. It further says to dial 0 to reach the front desk, both of which should be pretty much basic for anyone who has spent any time at all in the US. The best part was that I could maintain my professional helpfulness and still got to see her husband just disgusted with her stupidity. Story 24. When I was a little boy growing up in a smallish town, I came home from school one day and found that my mom and little brother were gone. Mind you, I was in 4th grade and took the bus home, and there was always someone home when I got back from school. So obviously someone had kidnapped my mom and little brother. I called 911 and the police came by, about 3 minutes after they arrived. My mom came rolling into the driveway in the car. Turns out they weren't kidnapped. Also on another occasion, not 911, but I came home and they were gone again. So crying and worried, I went to the next door neighbor's house, who just so happened to be the chief of police and his wife. He wasn't home, but she was. She took care of me and fed me a few Girl Scout cookies till my mom got back. Good people, those two. Story 25. I was sitting at work today talking to a dispatcher about this. One of my personal favorites was someone who called and it went like this. I know this is not an emergency, but there is a person in a giant monkey suit running down the road, duck all the fire hydrants. I had to hold back my laughing as best I could. Turns out he was right. When I sent the police, there was a kid in a monkey costume duck every hydrant he came across. Story 26. Before I tell couple stories a little background, I'm a graveyard dispatcher for a small county in Kansas. We cover the sheriff, PD, fire, EMS dispatching along with the 911 throughout the county. A lot of counties to cover, but it's usually pretty quiet. Most 911 usually involve wrecks with deer, or old ladies who have fallen and need help life alert, cows on roadways. I've had a call from an elderly lady that woke up from a nightmare and felt the need to call 911, spitting out random information, including, the gas station we are at is gonna explode. The kids are playing under it. I can't wake the driver. She went on a while of a stream of thought, then started to quote an infomercial on some Shark vacuum that runs early in the morning, and you could barely hear in the background. I sent a first responder to verify she was okay and not having a mental breakdown. Another was a kid that was back visiting some family decided to go mudding, though the county he didn't know after a heavy rainstorm at night and gets lost. Then calls 911 on a feature phone and trying to give directions of where he thinks he's at. While he was on the phone, it sounded like he dropped the phone, and I hear moaning on the line before it disconnects. After sending SNR and finally finding him, it turned out he was walking along the side of a mud road in the dark while talking to me and stepped over a creek embankment and fell 10 feet and broke a leg and the phone hit the water. I'll post a couple more if these get any attention. Story 27. I had a guy call me one night and tell me he had died. Obviously, I was pretty sure he was incorrect in his diagnosis, so I started questioning him. He would not tell me where he was, but I could hear him walking around, leaves underfoot and such. This was in the fall, and it was cold outside. I was asking him what he could see, and all he would tell me is that he died and needed me to call his mom and tell her, but wouldn't give me her name or a phone number. Eventually, the police dispatcher, who was still listening on the line, was able to get enough clues from him to make an educated guess as to his location. Sure enough, the PD officers found him in a cemetery, naked and piss-drunk, sitting on a random headstone. He was most assuredly not dead. Another dispatcher friend of mine had a person call and tell us that she wasn't looking too good and needed an ambulance. They questioned the caller and start CPR instructions. It took several minutes for the crew to make scene, and when they entered, they found our caller performing CPR on a bathrobe. The caller had recently moved to our coverage area and had been in a mental facility beforehand. Also, when I worked on the law enforcement side, people would frequently call to get the correct time to set their clocks. They knew that we had atomic clocks and ours were always correct. Story 28. My mom used to be a raging alcoholic. Been sober for 3 years now, though. Interestingly, I got sober right when I left for college. Anyway, one time she was sloshed and pissed that I was watching TV and basically ignoring her. She kept yelling at me to turn it off and I wouldn't, so she called 911 telling them her piece of crap son wouldn't turn off the TV. They sent a few cops over, ones that had been to our house before for similar issues. And mostly they just talked to me and my little sisters about how we were doing and telling us we could always call them if we needed help or support or something. Story 29. When I was a kid, I didn't know what a fire drill at school was. I came to America in 1899. I went to the washroom when the fire alarm rang. I was in the midst of a piss, so I quickly hurried up and zipped up my zippers on my pants. While zipping up, my junk managed to get in the way up my upward zip movement, and I just a pretty big cut on the bottom of my junk. I called 911 since I was scared to tell my school. When the real firefighters were there, my school was confused since they told them they were only having a drill. Good guy firefighters rescued me and never told my school. Story 30. My dad is a 911 operator. They live in a town of 200 people, so you can imagine how boring of a job that would be. But one night he gets a call, and there's a guy stating that he's being held at gunpoint, and the guy's about to hit him. My dad is a little shocked and asks the guy if there's anything that can prevent this from happening. The guy seems pretty shaken up and says, "No, I think he's gonna hit me. You better get here quick, he's gonna hit me." So my dad then asks him if there's any way he can talk to the guy holding him captive. He says, "I don't think he wants to talk to you, but hold on, I'll ask." He puts the phone down and then picks it back up. Yeah, he doesn't want to talk to you. My dad tries to get him to convince the captor to talk to him, but apparently it wasn't working. So my dad then asks for a description of the captor. The guy says, well, he's tall and skinny, has some big hat on his head, and has a tail, my dad thinks. What the hell, a tail? So at this point, he knows something is kind of fishy. He asks the guy about the tail, and he says, well, it has these two metal ends that are trying to shock me. Ding, ding, ding. He's describing a ducking lamp. At this point, the police are almost to his house. When the guy sees them pulling up, he says, oh crap, someone's here. I gotta go, and hangs up. Apparently, when the police came inside the house, the guy was nowhere to be found. They were looking around the living room and bedrooms for him when all of a sudden they hear this loud banging noise coming from the basement. They ran downstairs and this guy is in the bathroom, beating the duck out of the walls with a hammer. He's in the walls. Apparently, this guy was a recovering alcoholic in his mid-30s. And I guess a symptom of withdrawals is hallucination. I laugh my ass off every time me and my dad talk about that story. I do feel kind of bad for that guy, though. Hopefully the lamp left him alone after that. And story 31, 20-year 911 dispatcher and supervisor here. Had a guy call and ask if the line was recorded. I assured him all our lines were recorded. He started to recite his last will and testament and then shot himself. All 911 recordings are legal documents, so he just saved money on a lawyer giving his will over the phone. Story 32. I have two that tie for the most ludicrous. First was not taken by me, but a coworker. He answers the phone and a male is screaming, I've been hit in the back by my mother. Male is crying, screaming all around sounds to be in pain, and is pretty upset. Call is started. About 15 officers racing to this guy. And meanwhile, my coworker's trying to get further information. I can hear my coworker asking where the knife is. Has to ask multiple times, is starting to raise his voice. When I hear him ask if the caller is kidding, turns out the caller was confused as to why he was being asked about a knife, and calmly explained, about 5 minutes into the call, that there was no knife. He had been stabbed metaphorically in the back by his mother. A few of the units choose to still respond very quickly and explain why this situation was not good for the caller. Story 33. I'm in the UK where it's 999, but essentially the same thing. I didn't work there for very long, but I remember a really drunk lady calling up from a bar on a Sunday afternoon to tell me she couldn't find her coat. When I told her it wasn't an emergency, she went crazy at me. Story 34. I volunteered as an EMT for a while, and this is by far the stupidest call I've ever been on. It was about 2 a.m. I had just gotten back from a call and was ready to go to bed. I wearily climbed the stairs, counting down the seconds until I could lay my head against the rock-hard pillow that is provided. I clamber into my bed, and no longer than 5 seconds after my head hits the pillow, crap, gotta go out again. So we all run to the ambulance, hit the sirens, and we're off. The address that we are responding to is a well-known old folks home, so we're all pretty bummed. It's going to be old person call again. We pull up to the old folks home and walk in the lobby. Almost immediately, an elderly lady stands up and yells, "Go home, I don't need you." We stare at her dumbfounded. "What do you mean?" I ask her. She looks at me sheepish and croaks, "Well, I left my life alert on the coffee table, and I think my cat got to it. So I'm okay. I'm seeing red. You're ducking it's 2 a.m., and you call me for a ducking cat." Of course, I don't say that. I just say, "That's all right. Call us if you need anything." My driver was not so kind. "If your cat does that again, I'm taking it," he said before storming out. Regardless, a cat called 911 that night. Story 35. There's a car parked outside of my neighbor's. It looks suspicious. It keeps pulling up to his house every day. Wait, my neighbor just got in it. I don't know whose car it is. Story 30. Stupidest can mean so many things. To me, as a former 911 operator and dispatcher, something like calling for directions through town, asking for numbers to taxi cabs, etc. are all stupid reasons. There are informational numbers and phone operators that can handle most of that stuff. I suppose the silliest thing that springs to my mind is the time this guy called. He sounded like an old man, and he was a bit drunk or stupid. It was hard to tell. The conversation went something like this. Caller: "I want to file charges against my granddaughter's dog." Operator: "Why, sir? What did the dog do?" Caller: "Well, I think the dog has been licking her." Operator: "Okay, just tell me what happened." Caller: "Well, I opened the bathroom door last time I was at my son's house. His daughter was on the floor. The dog was licking her." Operator, trying not to laugh: "Sir, are you sure that the dog is the suspect or the victim? It is just a dumb animal. It sounds to me like your granddaughter was taking advantage of it." Either way, I don't think it's something the police can handle. I can give you the number for animal control if you want. Caller: "You know what? You have a point." Operator: "Yes, you should talk to her parents about it, not involve the police." Caller: "Oh, okay, thanks, buddy. Bye." Story 37. Lady from the EPA called saying there were a few single Bottlemet labs on the side of the road. She insisted that's what they were, citing she had training in the field. Bomb squad was dispatched to find harmless roadside trash. Story 38. I was the Zero operator for a long time. During that time, a lot of rural areas didn't have 911 service, so they would call Zero in emergencies. I had a bunch of weird calls. I had a guy call and ask how to write a check. He just got his first bank account and really didn't know. Men calling and asking what color our underwear was. And on Thanksgiving, we'd always get an Aston of "how do you cook a turkey" calls. So much so that our office had the Genio Turkey Toll free number posted at every desk every year. Story 39. About 15 years ago, while I was in college and taking a film class, me and a few other students from the class was doing a project which involved filming a scene in a parking lot. Part of the scene was doing a close-up shot of a woman dialing 911 on a payphone and screaming about witnessing someone dumping a body out of a car onto the side of a dirt road. About 2 minutes after we finished filming the scene, the payphone started ringing. It was the 911 operator calling to ask who had just called. None of us knew that you could actually dial 911 on a payphone without having to put a quarter into the payphone. After we explained everything to the 911 operator and apologizing, we went ahead and filmed another scene, filming a car driving quickly down the road and dumping a body onto the side of the road and then driving off. While we were filming the scene, turns out that the 911 operator still sent a police officer to check out the area. A police officer had just turned onto the dirt road in the distance, just as we did the scene of the body being pushed out of the car and driving off, which resulted in him turning his lights on and then stepping out of his car with his shotgun. Story 40. I had a woman call 911 at 3 a.m. because she saw a possum in her yard. She lived in the middle of the country, farmland. How the hell was she surprised to see a possum? She asked if animal control would come out. No. Our animal control does not deal with freaking possums. She asked if a cop could come out and shoot it. No, that's not going to happen. You're a grown-ass adult. Deal with it yourself. She asked if it was going to attack her dogs. She started getting hysterical and asking what she should do. I don't live in the country and don't routinely deal with possums, but I went with my first instinct, maybe turn the porch light on and make some loud noises. She asked me to stay on the phone because she was scared, then went out on the porch and made loud whooping noises for a minute. She came back to the phone, and her voice was ducking reverent. "Oh, it worked! You're a genius! You just saved my dogs! I know that possum was after them. It's gone now. Thank you. I'd hate to see what happened if something more ominous, like a baby deer or a bunny rabbit, showed up in her yard. We might have to call in SWAT. Story 41. When I was in high school, my friend and I went to McDonald's and slid down their slides with the trays, and we got kicked out and banned. A few weeks or months later, we went back and were refused service. My friend pulled out her phone and called 911 to report that McDonald's would not serve us. Yeah, she was that person. Story 42. My parents asked me if I could babysit for a kid whose parents they were going out to dinner with that night. My first time ever babysitting. The kid's parents warned me that the kid gets out of control occasionally, but I didn't think twice about it. The night is going fine, and when it's eventually time for the kid's bedtime, he begins to put up a bit of a fight. After a little argument, I get him upstairs and into bed. I close the door and begin thinking that was easier than I expected. About a half hour later, the doorbell rings. I go upstairs and see flashing lights right outside the door. I open up the door and there are 5 cops, 2 with guns drawn, 3 with hands on holsters. Turns out the kid called 911 from his room after I put him to bed and told the cops there was a stranger in the house trying to kidnap him. Never babysat again. Story 43. I wasn't a 911 operator, but worked for an emergency answering service for doctors and other places that might get calls when out of the office. I have 2 favorite stories. One was the pregnant lady who insisted I wake up the on-call. Chief of OB-GYN at the hospital was on call that night because she had itchy nipples, itchy ducking nipples. But because I'm not medically trained, if the patient says it is an emergency, I have to page it. He was not happy with me. Second was an apartment complex I answered for, and a tenant called in stating that the building was on fire. I advised him to call 911, which presumably he did. So I paged the on-call for them, because I figured someone there might like to know the building was on fire. When the on-call was non-responsive, I had to escalate the call to the owner of the complex, who proceeded to Karen me out because, what do you want me to do about it? I'm not the fire department. He also called my boss in the morning to file a complaint. Sorry, dude. Thought you might want to know about your displaced tenants, burned building, and flooded floors from the sprinkler system. Guess not. Story 44. I was the stupid caller once, through no fault of my own, mind you. This was in college. I was a property manager at some college apartments, basically a glorified RA. There was this creepy guy, wearing a brown shirt, walking up to the doors to the buildings, trying to get in. They were always locked. You needed a key or someone to buzz you up. I watched him a bit and just got a really bad vibe about him, so I called the police. Just figured maybe they could drive through the complex and scare him off. Well, it obviously wasn't a big hurry kind of call, so by the time they got there, the creepy guy was gone. But you know who was there instead? The UPS guy. So the cops come up to me and, in the most patronizing manner, explained to me that the guy dressed in brown, ringing the doorbells and trying to get in, was a delivery man. I told them it was a different guy, but I got the distinct feeling that they didn't believe me and thought I was just an idiot. My wife thinks this story is hilarious. I don't think she believes me either. Story 45. I had a friend in high school who would often babysit her niece. Whenever the niece were upset with my friend, she would lock herself in a bedroom with the phone and call 911 and then hang up. Many times, an officer was sent to the house, and my friend would have to lie every time that her niece was trying to call her mother, 917 area code, and that the one key on that phone stuck, so the call was an accident. Story 46. Not a 911 operator, but used to be a firefighter. We took a call from dispatch once where a lady spilled a glass of water on the top of her computer. She was afraid it was going to burst into flame. When we got there, I just kind of swiped the water from the top of the case. Then we got a nice long story about how one of the major film publishing companies, Miramax maybe, has a freight train in Wisconsin transmitting radio waves into her brain to make her forget things. Apparently, she knows the truth that the only people who can become famous are the ones that Steven Spielberg approves of. Also, she slept in a box lined with aluminum foil. Story 47. When I was 11 or 12 years old, mid-90s, I was waiting for my mom to finish paying at the checkout line. My dumbass thought it would be awesome if I dialed 911 from the payphone just outside the store. I dialed it. Someone picked up. I freaked out and hung up. A few minutes later, my mom wasn't done paying yet, and I was still near the payphone, looking at the coin vending machines when a police officer comes up to the phone. He asks me, "Did you dial 911?" I was scared as duck, thinking I'd go to jail or something, so I said no. But it was obvious I was lying. So he gets his radio and mentions there's an adolescent near the payphone, blah, 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 something. When I heard him call me an adolescent, I was so happy. Whatever he said after that didn't even register. I was thinking, wow, someone recognized I'm not a kid anymore. I never messed with payphones again, but that day, someone acknowledged me as more than a kid, and I felt like a man. Story 48. I'm a caller. My work truck got broken into. They broke the back window to get in and grabbed the loose change and GPS that I tiredly left out and on the night before. My company required that I file a police report, so I looked up the local precinct's number and called. They told me I needed to call 911 to get an officer dispatched. I made sure they knew it wasn't an emergency, but they insisted it was the proper channel. I was a little surprised, but did as they said. I had to give them my address, and I told them where the truck was located. I stood by my truck waiting for the cops for a couple hours, but they went to my apartment instead of where my truck was. I had to call 911 again to get them to come again. Silver lining. I got a new GPS with lifetime map updates, already made up the difference in quarterly map updates. Story 49. So, this is actually the opposite of the request, but it feels relevant. It was halfway through my first day as a temporary 411 operator, and I got a frantic call. Her. Connect me with the police. Me. Hang up and dial 911. Her. Just connect me. So, here's the problem. You can't just connect someone as a 411 operator. You can do a search, and then when you find the result they want, you can hit a button and connect them. But I didn't really know what I was doing, and all the police numbers I was finding were specialized, non-emergency ones. There were pages of them. So I'm looking, and I hear people totally yelling in the background, like screaming profanities and such. Me. So, out of curiosity, what exactly is happening over there? Her. My brother-in-laws are fighting. At that point, I finally found an appropriate number and connected her. Story 50. 911 operator receives a call from a Spanish-speaking subject. The operator does not speak Spanish, and the translator we used was unavailable. Following protocol, she sends me and another cop to check on the caller. Neither of us speak Spanish either. We are met by mom and dad and their 5-year-old son. After several minutes of broken English and hand gestures, we conclude that they're trying to tell us that the kid hasn't pooped in several days. Figuring we have some sort of medical emergency, we have an ambulance dispatched. Once the crew shows up, they begin to ask questions of dad and the kid and are getting the same results I did. I stepped outside and was able to locate a neighbor to help translate. It turns out dad had called 911 and tied up 2 cops, 3 EMSTs, and 2 paramedics for 30 minutes because his 5-year-old had crap his pants. Story 51. Not a 911 operator, but when I was little, I found my grandpa's life alert and tried to use it as a TV remote. That must have been embarrassing for my dad to clear up. Story 52. 911 dispatcher in Phoenix A's. So it's hot, it's wintertime, and I get a 911 call from a lady saying that her neighbor neglects and abuses his dog. Upon asking how, she says that he leaves the dog outside and goes to the bar. It was wintertime in Arizona, so that means our nights were about 40 degrees, animal control is closed, and the lady was being really nice, so I decided to take the information and was going to let animal control know of the situation. This lady was deathly afraid the dog was going to freeze overnight. Absolutely convinced. I started taking the information, address, names, numbers, and when I had asked the lady what type of dog it was, the response I got made me laugh so hard I had to mute my headset. This lady was absolutely certain that a Siberian Husky wouldn't survive a night in 40 degrees. People aren't very smart. Story 53. Where can I start? 911 operator for 8 years. One that happens more than you would think is parents calling asking help from the police to help parent their child. I need someone here to tell my son, daughter, to do their homework / take a bath, wake them up, make them go to school. One of my favorites, though, are the calls from gentlemen who arrange meetings with ladies for some survey. Guys meeting up with escort. And then guys call the police when the ladies take their money, but nothing happens. It is fun getting these calls because they always try to make it seem like it wasn't some type of meetup with a working girl. It is also fun to ask them if they are sure they want to speak with an officer, since soliciting escort is also a crime as well. After hearing that, they just say, never mind, every time. Story 54. I'm not a 911 operator, but once I misdialed 911 because the area code to India is 9111. So yeah, it ended up that I didn't tell anyone, and the police came to my house. It was pretty embarrassing. Story 55. I had a kid call because the room was spinning, 20-something, and he is crying. I asked him if he had been drinking or taking any substances that night. He initially denied it. I asked him again and told him that lying will not help him but only hurt him. He admitted to eating a brownie, first time, after drinking a little bit. He had not been feeling well for several hours and wanted to go to the hospital. I really wanted to tell him, drink some water, play some relaxing music, go to sleep and it will pass. Instead, I couldn't and had to stay on the phone with him while he cried. He refused to let me hang up and said he didn't understand the pre-arrival. Long story short, Stupid gets arrested for possession because he had another brownie and was transported non-emergent to the ED by the BLS. Oh yeah, he was supposedly an Ivy League student. Story 56. Not a dispatcher, but this is something stupid. A friend of mine did. My friend was 7 years old and his goldfish had just died. Now he was very upset about it and didn't want to flush it, so his parents decided to bury it in the backyard against his wishes. He was so upset that he called 911 and said that his best friend was dead and his parents buried him in the backyard. So fast forward 5 minutes to the SWAT team showing up, having both of his parents detained and having the yard destroyed. He finally had to clarify that it was a fish that the dispatcher called the SWAT team for. Sorry for any format issues, I'm using my phone. Story 57. There is nothing like working at a university police department when it comes to stupid calls. The stupidity from smart people can sometimes amaze me, especially from the faculty staff. I've had a student call into 911 for the bleeding from lost ball sack. That was a fun call over the radio to the officers. Needless to say, I had to choose my words carefully. I've even had professors call in for tech help because they couldn't figure out how to get the floppy disk into their computers that only had CD drives. Story 58. I called 911 once around midnight. I was a 21-year-old girl at the time, and I said, I was whittling wood and I accidentally hit my wrist. When responders showed up, they were surprised and disarmed to find a small pile of wood shavings next to a papasan chair with a trail of blood leading into the kitchen and me squeezing my wrist above my head as hard as I could. One of them said, "Oh, wait, so you really were whittling wood?" And another said, "You were our third death call tonight." I can only imagine the 911 operator's eyes rolling at me. We stopped bleeding and I was fine, but my whittling days are through. Story 59. My boyfriend is a paramedic and he said that a woman called 911 because she wanted them to explain to her son why he shouldn't have sex. Great use of city resources right there. Story 60. Not actually a 911 call, but a lady called on the admin line to complain that her boyfriend got drunk and walked home from the bar. She continued to tell me how much she cared for him and about how much effort she put into their relationship. My favorite call was actually taken by the shift before me. Guy's name is sitting in the street drunk lighting fireworks and saying he's gonna hit all of people. Enjoyed listening to that recording. Elderly lady called in on emergency line and wanted the FD to come to her house because her AC unit sounded funny. Also, people lose their minds very fast during power outages. Another one that irks me. Hey, I don't have an emergency, but then don't ducking call the emergency line. Story 61. I am the cause of a stupid ducking call, if that counts. As kids, there was a guy in the neighborhood with a ton of raspberry bushes in his backyard. Every summer, we'd ring his doorbell to ask if it was okay if we could lean over the fence and pick the ones he missed because it was a lot of fun. The neighbor across from him, an old Karen, yelled at us every year. We would tell her we cleared it with the neighbor, as always, and to go ducking ask her next door neighbor. One year, she called the police for raspberries that we asked if we could have. When the car pulled up, we scattered. We didn't know she made such a stupid call, and I truly hope the officer yelled at her for it. Story 62. One evening in my younger years, friends and I were drinking quite heavily. Someone asked me to call a friend for them and handed me a phone. They began to recite the telephone number, 911. Without even thinking, I dialed the number 1 a second time and was immediately connected to dispatch. As soon as I heard the voice, I hung up. My a-hole friends laughed for a bit but thought nothing of it, and we continued drinking. I fell asleep, and a while later, there was a knock on the door and 2 officers walked in. Unfortunately, at this point, I was passed out and awoke to find my friends had put processed cheese slices all over me and 2 unhappy officers were standing over me. Story 63. I've got quite a few, but last Christmas Eve, an elderly woman called in after waking up from a nap stating, "I woke up and my chimney is on fire." Well, this was just after midnight, and all the firefighters were probably out cold, hoping for no more calls. After telling her to evacuate the residence, she told us she couldn't because she was wheelchair-bound with no help. We tried calling neighbors to go over really quick and help until everyone arrived, but no luck, no one answered. Finally, law enforcement arrives on scene and confirms it was just Channel 11 on Cox Cable, where it plays the Yule log fireplace for the holiday season. The kicker to all of this was she didn't even have a chimney. Story 64. When we were little, my aunt was nearly married to a guy who was well respected in the community as a firefighter and 911 dispatcher. He made the mention to my little brother, about 4, that he works at 911. He bought him a remote control fire truck for Christmas. So a few months later, a cop shows up at the door. He said, "Ma'am, do you have a small child?" My mother said she did. He said, "He's been calling 911 all day looking for his Uncle Tommy because the batteries in his toy died." My mother then explained the situation and he was very understanding. He even knew our Uncle Tommy. Apparently his buddies busted him about it for a few years. Story 65. My favorite call related to drinking. An RA at the local college calls in. She's hesitant and isn't sure if she should have called 911. I ask what the problem is. "There's a sophomore here, and I think he's too drunk. Do you think he has alcohol poisoning? Is he conscious and alert, breathing?" He's breathing and stuff. He can't get on the toilet." "Excuse me? I've been watching him for the last 30 minutes. He keeps trying to get on the toilet and failing. Okay, then I'll send you an ambulance. It's kind of entrancing. He's trying so hard and he just can't get on top of it. Story 66. My dad woke up in the middle of the night and heard a scratching sound that sounded like someone cutting through the window screen. He told my mom to call 911 while he went to investigate. As she was on the phone explaining the situation, he discovered that it was Big Claw, the pet hermit crab, who had escaped from his cage and was climbing up the heater vent. My mom said to the operator, "Oh, never mind. It's just the hermit crab." The woman on the line said, "Well, that's a new one." Story 67. When I was around 6, my younger brother, 4, called 911 while crying and said that Freddie died. He then hung up the phone, and 10 minutes later, the police arrived, only to find out that Freddie was our goldfish and my brother was trying to bury him in the backyard. My mom was livid. Story 68. I'm a paramedic, and on the 4th of July, we got a call to some woman's house who said that a firework went off in her lawn from some kids across the street and that her son was now bleeding pretty badly because it exploded next to him. The kid had a small cut, something you'd get if you stuck your finger with a goddamn pin or something. We literally put a Band-Aid on him while the mom took pictures of us for her mother ducking scrapbook or whatever. I hate people. Why am I volunteering to save them? Story 69. My best friend is a 911 dispatcher, and when I see him every week, my favorite thing is to ask him about the craziest thing that has happened. There is always something. My most recent favorite, a woman called 911, and my friend took the call. She reported that she thought she saw someone talking on the phone while driving, which is illegal in the town he works. When my friend asked for details, she wasn't sure which direction he was driving, what the car looked like, or wasn't 100% sure he was on the phone, and it might have been a woman. Story 70. A friend of mine took a call 2 days ago. A woman was stopped at a red light around 5 p.m., thought the red light turned green but didn't see any other cars moving. She then proceeded to drive through the busy intersection even though she was unsure if the light was green. Thankfully, she wasn't hit, but she decided to call 911 to report that she just drove through a red light that she thought was green and that there was a possibility that the light was both green and red at the same time. My friend immediately replied, "Ma'am, are you sure that it wasn't just the sun shining in the light?" Turns out it was.